This is the sixth and final video for 6.5 operations with radical expressions. So one thing to review before we get into this next example is the word conjugate. So we talked about conjugate a lot with imaginary or complex numbers. So the conjugate of 4 minus 5i was 4 plus 5i. Remember, you just changed the sign of the imaginary part. Or we could also say you change the sign of the second value. A similar thing is true for radicals. So the conjugate of square root of 5 plus square root of 3 is square root of 5 minus square root of 3. Again, notice just change the sign of the second part. We need to use this conjugate to be able to simplify some expressions. So hopefully you remember from a past video, you're not allowed to have a square root or any sort of radical in the denominator. That's a big no-no, just like having an I in the denominator, just like dividing by 0. Those are all big mathematical mistakes. So what we need to do is we need to get rid of that square root of 5. But notice attached to that square root of 5 is plus 1. So I can't just break that square root of 5 off from that plus 1. I need to include that plus 1. This is where the conjugate comes into play. So when we were dealing with getting rid of the I, or the complex number in the denominator, we wanted to multiply by the conjugate. So we're going to do a similar thing here. So the conjugate of square root of 5 plus 1 is square root of 5 minus 1. Remember, all you're going to do is change the sign of the second part. So that plus changed to a minus. Again, the square root of 5, the sign stays the same. But if I multiply the denominator by the square root of 5 minus 1, I also need to do the same thing to the numerator. I need to multiply by the square root of 5 minus 1. So luckily, remember, when you're multiplying fractions, you just multiply right across. So in the numerator, I'm going to take this 2 and distribute it through to each of those terms. Sorry, negative 2, and distribute it through to each of those terms. So negative 2 times square root of 5 becomes negative 2 square root of 5. You cannot multiply the 2 and the 5 because the 5 is under a square root, the 2 is not. And then you have negative 2 times negative 1. That is a positive 2. So my top has been multiplied. Now I just need to multiply the bottom. Hopefully, again, you see this is just like the last examples we looked at in the last video, where you're multiplying two binomials. Here's two terms, here's two terms, so you need to use that distributive or FOILing that a lot of you like to call it. So square root of 5 times square root of 5 becomes square root of 25. Square root of 5 times negative 1 is negative 1 square root of 5. I don't have to put the 1 in front. If you want to, you can. Now I have 1 times square root of 5, which is plus 1 square root of 5. Again, you don't have to put in the 1 in front. And then you have 1 times negative 1, which is negative 1. Last thing we need to do here is we need to clean some stuff up to combine some stuff if we can. So in the numerator, you can't combine anything, but in the denominator, we definitely can combine some stuff and simplify. Square root of 25 becomes 5. And then the negative square root of 5 plus the square root of 5, I can add these because the radicand of 5 is the same and the index of 2 is the same. So we have negative 1 plus 1. Those cancel. So really in your denominator, you have 5 minus 1. So in the numerator, we have negative 2 square root of 5 plus 2. And in my denominator, I have 5 minus 1, which is 4. So this is your answer here when you simplify negative 2 divided by the square root of 5 plus 1. You'll get negative 2 square root of 5 plus 2 all over 4. If you're really interested, remember from the quadratics chapter, it's not going to change. If you can simplify this correctly, I'll give you some bonus there. To simplify this, you would divide 4 into each part. So negative 2 square root 5 divided by 4. The negative 2 and the 4 can be divided out to give you negative 1/2. So we have negative square root of 5 over 2. And then 2 divided by 4, again, that's 1/2 as well. So if you were looking for bonus and simplifying, you would get bonus if you correctly simplified it to negative square root of 5 over 2 plus 1 over 2.